Hey everybody, it's Brad with another Floriani Total Control U video for you today. And today we're going to be talking about the Preferences menu, all right? And so the Preferences menu allows us to change a bunch of under-the-hood settings for the software. And I want to go through and explain what each setting is, because I don't think I have a video, at least not a modern video in the past like 10 years, on how all those different settings can change things in your software. So the program preferences can be found in a number of places. It's always right here, though, next to the percentage of zoom level that you're at. This one right here, program preferences. If you click on that, this menu is going to come up, and as you can see, it has tabs, and in each tab are some settings. And a lot of times the settings aren't like exactly explained super well. So I just want to tell you what the different options are in here. Now, every time you update the software, these reset. So, you know, if you find some settings that you like and then they come out with a new update and you update the software, you will have to go back in here and readjust these. But the first tab that comes up by default when you click on the preferences menu is this Formats tab, okay? And the first option is default style. Now the style is the set of default settings that you get in the properties menu for a design that you start digitizing. So for instance, if I were to just bring in, you know, just a super simple shape here, we got this little bear, right? And I go in here and I apply a stitch to it, right? So here I've just made this a fill stitch, all right? And if we look over here in our settings, the defaults for this come up and the density is 0.5. We look at the underlay and it has just a perpendicular underlay set. If we look in the pull push compensation, we can see that there is 0 in both of these values, so there's no pull compensation applied to this bear, which means that it's not going to compensate at all for the amount that the fabric is pulling, is being pulled by the thread. So this, if we have this bear next to something else, it's going to be further away on the fabric than it looks on this on the software, right? So that's what pull compensation does. So by default, you don't get any of that. In normal, it's expecting you're going to do one of two things. You're going to know how to go in and adjust these values yourself. So like I could say, all right, well, I want my pull compensation to be 0.4 millimeters and hit apply. And, you know, there you go. Now you've got some pull compensation. Or it may be expecting that what you're going to do is go and do the file and save to sew wizard, which you can actually go in and choose here what type of material it's going to do. And then it will go and change things like adjust your density, adjust the underlay, adjust the pull compensation, right? But if you want to, instead of knowing how to do it yourself or using the Save to Sew wizard, sometimes the Save to Sew wizard kind of changes your design in a way that you don't like. I don't use it because of that. But what we can do is in preferences here, we can set a default style that will automatically adjust underlay, pull compensation, and things like that based on what type of material we're sewing on. So if we only ever sew on ball caps, or we only ever sew on golf shirts, or something like that, we can go in and set a default style here, and there's a ton of different options in there. And it has options for I digitized versus I didn't digitize. So if it's a design that started out as already an existing embroidery design, that would be I didn't digitize. If it's a design that you are digitizing yourself, then you would set I digitized. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to choose I digitized for whatever I pick in here because I'm the one digitizing stuff. What I like, actually, I like the settings for PK Knit. Actually work pretty well for a lot of different things. It adds a little bit of pull compensation. It changes the default underlay. And so I'm just going to leave that set here and hit OK. But notice that my style up here, right here, this is where it tells me what style I have it set to. It's still normal because the file that I created first, you know, when I created a new design here, was created under the old settings. So I don't get the new setting until I actually hit new, like create a new page here. Now this new design here says style PK knit, and if we go in and we bring in that same bear, where is he? We get this bear here, and we do the same thing, just make it a fill stitch. The density setting is the same, okay? But if I go and I look under underlay, now we have both a contour and a perpendicular. as opposed to the first one. Oh, I deleted them, didn't I? Well, the first one just had the perpendicular underlay. And then we also look in the pull and push compensation, and we've actually got our pull compensation set to 0.5 and our push compensation set to 0.4, which is pretty good. If we wanted to have, one color and have it right next to the other color, you want to have them overlap a little bit, and that's what pull compensation is going to do. That's going to compensate for the fact that the thread is trying to pull the fabric, in a direction. So a lot of times if you have registration issues where you digitize an embroidery design and you sew it out and there's gaps, that's because you don't have sufficient pull compensation. And having it set for you out of the box when you're first getting started is handy. It's nice, and it will remember this setting from times that when I turn the computer back on, or when I turn the software back on. If I close it and come back on, the next design that I bring up is going to come up under the PK Knit style. So that is something that is it's going to retain between times of using the software until you actually do an update. All right, so that is what in formats the default style setting does. And the next one down, default save format. By default, out of the box, it wants to always save as a working file, as a WAF Floriani file, which is not a file that you can stitch out. So a lot of times when people are new to this, they'll try to save their design, save it as a WAF file, and the sewing machine doesn't read that because your sewing machine reads a stitch file or machine format file. So the way I recommend setting this up is set your default save format to whatever format your machine uses. All right, so if I'm using a baby lock, I would choose PES V11. All right, PES formats are usually backwards compatible, so if you just save in the newest version, it's going to work no matter what machine you are putting it on. The only caveat there is if you're saving it for a multi-needle, save it under the multi-needle format, because it changes a couple of things, the way the trims work and stuff like that. Otherwise, if you're using another brand, Bernina, you'd use an EXP, whatever format you use, set that as your, I'm going to set mine to PES V11, set that as your default save format, and then put a check mark next to autosave WAF format. And what that will do is when I save my design, I can just save it as the stitch format, right? If I save it as my PES file that I can sew out, it will also at the same time automatically save the WAF format as well. And if I do it this way, then it's not going to prompt me to pick the machine format every time. So if I have this set to default save the WAF and then I tell it to auto save the machine format, I have to tell it every time what machine format. So that might be good if you are if you're using two different machines or something, then you want to be able to pick what format. But if you got just a single embroidery machine, I would set this to your machine format, tell it to auto save the WAF format. Okay. Now hoop bracket location, that is for if you are looking at the hoop. So down on the left side down here, I can select what hoop I'm looking at. So if I've got a 4x4 hoop selected, this is the hoop bracket location. And I mean, I guess maybe some machines, the hoop bracket's in a different place. I don't know. I don't. All the machines I've ever used, the hoop bracket's on the left on a single needle. But I guess if you wanted to change that, you can. Now it's over there. What difference does that make? I don't think it makes any difference. I think this setting is completely pointless. But maybe it's not, and I've just never experienced the need for that. Whatever. That's what that setting does. Is it changes that little graphic if you have the hoop selected over here. Okay, the next one down, color match on loading. So what this will do is, regardless of what the thread brand the design is digitized for, this will automatically change those colors to match the chosen thread chart over here. And by default, it will color match on loading to Floriani's brand of polyester thread. Surprise, surprise, that the Floriani software will default to the Floriani thread chart. But if you wanted to change that, if you just don't want it to do that, I want to see what colors it was digitized in, then you can uncheck this. And sometimes it really does make a difference, because sometimes you know, you're transmitting from one brand to another and the wires get crossed and you get a weird color thrown out there. So I would actually probably recommend generally not doing a color match on loading so you can see what the actual intended colors were. And then if you want to go and color match the design after that, you can see the change that gets made, right? Whereas if you just load it, you don't see the original intent, you just see the converted version. But here we can go in and choose. There's a million different formats to choose from in here. So, you know, if I'm using any of these brands of thread, I can go in there and pick it. It's a cord, you know, Hemingworth, whatever. All kinds of stuff is in there. So if you want to color match on load, that's what that does. I tend to turn that off personally, though, because, like I said, I like to see the colors that the design was digitized in and not have it converted. And if you choose something weird in here, like flesh tone here, right, then it's definitely, it's only got flesh tone colors in that color chart. So, you know, you'd end up with a design that looks weird. So it's possible to kind of break your design by having this selected and having a weird thread chart selected over here. So that's one I suggest you turn off. All right, convert outlines on open. This is something that used to be on by default until I think people were just so mad that their designs kept not looking right when they would open them up. So by default, this isn't on. There's really no reason to ever turn this on because you can, when you open a design, you can tell it to convert it to outlines right there. But what does that even mean? What is convert to outlines? Well, let's take a look at an embroidery design. I'm just going to go in and open one. Let's see, where do I have some embroidery designs on this computer? C drive. All right. So just looking for something that's an existing design here. All right, so here's this set of swans, right? And if I go in and I open it, this is a PES file, right? So this is not a working file. This is a stitch file. And if I open it and I don't convert it to outlines, what we get here is when we look in the sequence view, it's all just called stitches. There's no outline information. There's no ability to go in and adjust the density or the stitch width or anything like that on this. It just kind of is what it is. When it's not outlines, also by default, when I resize it, if I select this and I drag the corner down a little bit to resize it, take a look up there. The stitch count 6905. Let's make it a little smaller here. And 6905. So what does that mean? That means I just dramatically increased the density of this design by sizing it down and it not taking away any stitches. Okay, so that's a bad thing. So why wouldn't I want to do this thing where it says to convert to outlines? Well, let's take a look and see. Oh, I'm gonna let's undo that, put it back to the same height. So this time what I'm going to do, and actually I did digitize this design in this software, so, you know, it might actually work pretty well to do this, but if I go in and open, choose that same design here, swans.pes, this time I'm going to convert it to outlines and hit open. Now, right off the bat, there's a big difference here, okay? What is the difference? Look at the original file that I did not convert to outlines. Stitch count is 6,905. The one that I converted to outlines is 7,153. So like around 200-ish stitches just arrived there somehow. Where did they come from? Where did they get added? I don't know. Did it break the design at all? I don't know. Maybe. Let's look. Put them both in 3D. Let's see. Let me take a look at this part of the design here. And then take a look at it on this one. It's different. There's a gap. There's like a gap right here that isn't there on this one. So yeah, it kind of broke my design to do that a little bit. And what it does is, yeah, it makes it so that I can resize this design and it changes the density for me. But it tends to screw up your outlines and you have to go back and you have to go in and fix these errors that crop up. Like I can see right here. I can see right here that there's an inclination that's jacked up. So I'd have to go in and find that part of the design, which I think it comes in grouped, and it's like hard to select. Like, there we go. Yeah, so the whole thing has come in grouped, and I'd have to break it all apart and go in and find this. So all that to say, don't enable convert to outlines. It is not worth it. If you've got like a super simple basic shape, maybe convert it to outlines, and then you can go in and edit it. But if you've got a design that actually stitches out right already, don't convert it to outlines when you open it. So I would say this option, no reason to ever check that, because you can, while you are choosing to open the design, you can choose to convert it to outlines there if you wanted to. So no reason to ever have that checked. They should never have had that as a default, and I'm glad that they changed it so that it's not. All right, that said, next we've got environment. So in environment, this is where we can change our system unit, which nowadays, because they've realized that this is America, it defaults to inches for our system unit. You know, I feel very free because of that. But if you wish, you can change this back to metric right here. And when you change your system unit to metric, that changes, it doesn't set it, if you're in inches, it doesn't set literally everything into inches, right? So I like the way that this program does inches because it still leaves things like stitch width and stitch length as metric, as they should be. When we're measuring little things, I mean, metric really is way better than having it be like, you know, 0.11, you know, inches or whatever, like 0.011 inches when we're talking about like a really small size. Metric just makes a lot more sense for that, but, you know, at least here in America, we think in inches for like the size of our design. So it's nice for it to tell me the overall size of my design in inches and then still have smaller things in metric. But if you don't like freedom units, you can set it to metric. And when I say OK here, that changes my whole grid ruler back here. So if we look at these lines up here, these are, it actually, I said grid, but it changes the ruler and not the grid. Okay, so my ruler has changed to be in metric, and everything that the software tells me now, like if I bring in a shape, that's telling me, well, actually, it still tells me in both metric and inches. Boy, they sure like freedom in Floriani. But anyway, it's telling me here the height along the side here of this shape in metric, and the width along here in metric, whereas if I have this set in my environment to inches, those values are being told to me in inches. Okay, I feel like if you think in inches, just leave it in inches, because the only reason I tell people to set something like palette, for instance. Palette, when you set it to inches, everything is set to inches, even the stuff that ought to be metric. So, like, you know, I really like the way that this does that. So anyway, all that to say, you may as well just leave this on inches if you're American. Auto save every 5 minutes. This is fairly self-explanatory, but while you are working on your design, the software will automatically save it for you in case the power goes out, or, you know, whatever kind of catastrophe happens, the computer blows up. I guess you wouldn't be able to get it if the computer blowed up, but anyway, it auto saves your design every 5 minutes. Now, how do I get to that? How do I get to my auto save design? Well, the way that you get to it is under File and Restore Auto Saved, and that's going to bring up a list of all the designs that have been automatically saved. So if you think that you lost your design because your power went out or your cat jumped on the keyboard or whatever, you can always go in and check that Restore Auto Saved option in File and see whether you know, your design that you think you lost is still there. And this is just setting, in the environment tab, this is just setting how often it does that. So, I mean, 5 minutes is fine, I think, for most people. But, you know, if you wanted to do it, you know, every 1 minute, you can do that. Or if you want to turn it off because you like to live dangerously, then go right ahead. Image editing program. So what this is it allows you to choose whatever program you want in order to go in and edit things in the auto digitizer. Okay, so if I'm in my auto digitizing wizard, right, and I choose an image and I want to edit something about this image with this button here, edit image, that chooses what software opens when I hit the edit image key. And by default, the software that opens is just plain old regular MS Paint. Okay, which is a super basic image editing program that lets me go in and change stuff. So now my pony has pink hair, and I can close it and save it, and it comes up and it's got pink hair now. Okay. If you prefer to use something like Photoshop or Corel Draw or whatever your preferred image editing software is, what you have to do, I'm just going to cancel out of this, is in your preferences here under environment for image editing program, you're going to go in and choose other program, and then find where the executable file for that program is. So if it was Photoshop, you would need to know where on your computer is the Photoshop executable, which I don't know off the top of my head. It's probably in Program Files, Adobe, Photoshop 2024, Photoshop.exe. So if I wanted to change it to that, I would have to know how to find where the executable file is for Photoshop, right? And then I would hit open here, and now my image editing program is set to Photoshop, and presumably, actually I've never tried to do this. Let's see what happens. If I'm right, what we should get, we'll open that same little horsey here, and I am, oh, that's not how I wanted to do it though. I want to go to the wizard here and select the horsey. There we go. And I'm going to hit edit image. It should open Photoshop now. So let's see. Hey, look at that. It's opening Adobe Photoshop. And now I can go in and edit this design using Photoshop. So if I have more experience, or I want to have the control over the design that using a more powerful software gives me, then I can do that. Of course, this is going to take 20 minutes to load, as opposed to how fast MS Paint loads. But if you were the kind of person that wants to change what the software you're using to edit the images, that's how you do it. So that's pretty cool, actually. All right, so I'm just going to cancel out of that. Yeah, Adobe, leave me alone. All right, so that was, here, let me get rid of my backdrop. That was in environment. We were at image editing program. All right, I'm going to change this back to good old MS Paint, because that's the one that I want to use. All right, language, this is self-explanatory. If you're speaking Portuguese, Spanish, or Czech, go ahead and change that. Otherwise, leave it on English. Okay, now here we have a bunch of things that we can check, right? And it doesn't really explain what this stuff means to you. Show warning for large satins. What the hell does that mean? Well, the warning for large satins is if you create a satin stitch that is wider than about 10 millimeters, it will put up a warning if you have a check mark here. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but sometimes if you try to create a satin segment that is nice and big, it looks real pretty on the computer, and then you bring that segment over to a sewing machine, and then there's big gaps where the stitches should be. There's just like a hole in the design. That's because home sewing machines can only create a satin stitch segment that's about 10 millimeters. Any more than that, it just will refuse to do it. It's going to treat it like it's a jump stitch, and it'll just, ignore it. So if you put a check mark here, what this is going to do is when I generate a satin segment that is too wide to be able to be sewn out, like this is like an inch wide, this is way, way, way bigger, it's going to not throw up a warning, because nowadays they actually have a thing that keeps you from doing this boneheaded maneuver. It will automatically do what's called a split to, here, if I put this in 3D, you see how this doesn't create one pretty satin stitch here? So the reason that they no longer default to having this warning is because the software won't even let you make a satin stitch this wide without going in and changing this setting here. This is where we have this this split setting. So if we wanted to try and force a satin stitch that's wide enough, we'd have to go under the split setting in our properties, change the quality control type to none, and hit apply. And it's still not letting me make a satin stitch that's wide enough to do it. It's just refusing to do it. So I guess that's why this check mark is no longer on here. It used to give you this warning for these, but I bet you that there's some things that you can do. Like I bet you that if I go into the text tool and I bring in, here, I'm just going to bring in a letter B, and I'm just going to keep making it bigger until I see if I get the warning. Let's see. No, it just refuses to do it. So set this back to random split. Yeah, that lets me do that. There we go. Okay. So I managed to find a way. So I set the quality control to middle split, which means it would try to split it down the middle. So here it's saying, hey, you are trying to create a satin segment that's wider than 10 millimeters, right? So I say, yeah, okay, sure. And now if I take this design, leaving aside that it's got this like underlay broken out and it doesn't look right anyway. If I try to take this design and sew it out on the sewing machine, it will not sew this out. And that is what that warning is for, to tell you not to do that. So, it's fine to have that check mark selected, but they've pretty much nowadays ironed out all the times that someone would, under normal circumstances, see that warning to begin with, because the software will automatically split your satin stitches once they get past like 7 millimeters or so. It'll automatically split your satin stitch in a way that makes it so that that warning is unnecessary. So there's really no reason to put that check mark in there, but that's what it does. Show navigator on startup. Now this is actually something that could be really handy for somebody that doesn't have a lot of screen space. Like I'm doing this on a 4K monitor, so I have tons of real estate on my screen. But what the navigator does, here I'm going to go ahead and click that, say OK. What the navigator does, and can I actually just view it under... Here we go, navigator. So this is the navigator. So by checking that little checkbox, what this is doing is every time I turn on the software now, this navigator will come up. And what this is for is if I've got a design and I want to move around in it. Here, let's say that. Well, this isn't a very good example for that. Let me bring in an embroidery design here. Now, if I want to get real close and look at, the level of overlap that I have in some of these stitches here. Now, if I want to move around, the navigator lets me move around the design in kind of a natural way without having to use these scroll tabs down here. All right. Now, if you can't view much of your design at once anyway, because it's a big design and you have a small screen, this navigator can be really handy because you can move it around. Just move it somewhere to a part of the screen you're not using, and you can use it to change where you're looking in the design, right? And you say, okay, so I've got good overlap all along here, but then I look at my helicopter blades and I can see that that and that don't overlap very well. So I can say, okay, yeah, so maybe this part of my design, I need to go in and adjust the pull compensation here. So maybe this needs to be a higher value so that it makes it a little bit wider so that there's more overlap. Right, so we can go in and do those things without having to like lose our design by accidentally clicking somewhere like this and whoop, now my design's gone. So if you've got the navigator, you can see right where you're looking relative to the rest of the design. So it's actually pretty cool. In other versions of this software that I've used, that would by default be enabled. So I don't really use it, but I see the utility in it, and that's what will happen every time if you go in and put a check mark next to Show Navigator on startup. Now, automatically select created paths. This is how it used to work by default. But what does it mean? Well, by default, if I go and I start drawing something, right? So if I go in and I draw this line, okay, this is a path, right? It's a line, it's a path, and the different things you could say about it. It's an outline, right? But what this is they're calling this a path because we can apply stitches to it and it will follow it like a little path, the way the stitches will go, okay? And what just happened is I generated my path. Left click, left click, left click, left click, left click, right click, and it is not selected. Okay, so if I want to go in and change this, I would have to go in and use the select tool to select it. And then I can go in and do stuff like, pull curves out of it or whatever I might want to do with it. But by default, it does not select items that you draw. All right. Now, if you are continually drawing, that is what you would want. So it just depends on how you digitize. So I tend to digitize by converting a segment into a stitch, which if you do it the way that I'm doing it, so I draw my shape in, then I want to have it selected so I can go in and change it however I want to change it, right? And then I want to apply what type of stitch I want it to be. Okay, and then I move on to the next segment. Whereas if you do the direct digitizing tools up here, and I'm doing a run stitch directly where I just click and I'm drawing, and when I right click, that's stitches now, okay, then I can continue doing another stitch, that stitches, right? Then it's better to have it not selected, because if it's selecting it after every one, then I have to go back and deselect it and pick my drawing tool again. All right, so the reason that you have the option to change that is because a lot of professional digitizers are going to digitize with the digitizing tools up here, okay? And it is, in some ways, more efficient to work that way. However, I have always done it the other way, where I go in and I draw a segment and then I apply a stitch type to it. Now, I can't do that because it's not selected, so I have to take an extra step, use the select tool, then I can apply my stitch to it. So the way that I like the software to work is in the preferences, I have it set to automatically select created paths. And if you have ever watched a video of mine and tried to follow along with it, and I have had that setting enabled, that may be a reason that you've been confused as to why my software is behaving differently than yours. So if I draw this line now and I right click, it automatically selects it, so I can just go directly to select the type of stitch that's in there. That's something that I really wish you'd be able to kind of like toggle that on and just have it always remember that. That's something that always drives me nuts because I always have to go back and change it. And I wish that it was the other way, but that might, by default, that it automatically does it the way that it used to. That might just be a selfish thing on my part because that's just the way that I prefer it. But anyway, that's what that setting does. So that is the automatically select created paths. Show drop-down menus on hover. This is again a personal preference, but what they're talking about here is some of the icons in here, like the text tool here, have options inside of them. Okay, and if I click on it, the flyout menu comes out, right? But if I hover over it, it just tells me the name of the tool. All right, now if I want it to work the other way, if I go in here and I say under environment, show drop-down menus on hover, when I hover over this, it's going to automatically have that drop-down menu pop out. Okay, so I didn't have to click it in order to do that. Same for any tool that you have a little arrow underneath of it. That means there's more stuff that it does, and that'll pop out that way. Okay, so that's a personal preference thing. I don't really care one way or the other personally. Okay, so enable auto scrolling. So what auto scrolling is if you are drawing, right? So let's say I'm drawing a stitch. Now I got to the top of my screen, and it's not, in order to keep going, I have to either go over here and use the arrow here, then I can keep going, or I can use the arrow keys on my keyboard, up, down, left, right, and I can pan around a little bit. Okay, if instead I have this selected, I'm going to set it to do it slow. Oop. Then when I get close to the edge, it'll automatically move a little bit, although you have to actually you have to have your mouse button held down in order for it to do it, so it's kind of stupid. But so honestly, I don't really care one way or the other on that one personally, because I just use the arrow keys to pan. I use the arrow keys on my keyboard to pan around the design field, and that's just kind of how I've always done it. So having it automatically pan when I get close to the edge could be annoying if I didn't want it to pan. So that, I think, by default being turned off is a good idea. And then it also will automatically tell you to disable that when in pen mode, because if you had it set for a pen mode, if you had the pen like on a tablet or something, every time you got close to the edge of the screen, it would start panning. So yeah, that's why it wants to disable that in pen mode. And then demo mode, what this does, I'm gonna not enable it. It's really for someone like me that has the software on their computer and is teaching it. And if you got somebody that has purchased like a lower level version of the software, or you want it to not have all of the options in there. Demo mode is kind of a way that I could put in. So if someone just had Floriani Fusion and I wanted to do a demo of just Floriani Fusion, and I have Total Control U on my computer, I don't want them to see everything in Total Control U because it would be confusing. And so it's something for dealers. It's like demo mode. It's not really for there's no reason for you to disable stuff that you paid for. But that's what demo mode is. There's no reason to ever play with that, really. All right, view. Here we've got a lot of stuff. So we're on the next tab here. So view, this allows us to go in and change some of the things about the way the software is going to look. Now the first one, I've always hated this, and then sometimes I leave it on, sometimes I turn it off. Highlight selection. What this is if you've got something in the design field, it doesn't matter what it is, as long as anything that stitches, what it's going to do is if it's selected, it's going to make it this color that is in right here. This, I can go in and change what color that comes up to. But what it does is when the object is selected, it highlights it in that color. I see the utility here, okay, so that I can tell when something is selected, which object is selected when something is selected. I see that. I don't like the way, I don't like it changing it. I can tell that it's selected because it's got a box around it. So I personally tend to turn this off. And then a recent addition is that it will also highlight the tree selection. What's the tree selection? Well, they don't call it anywhere else in the software other than right here. They don't call it the tree. It's called the sequence view, okay? But here they're calling it the tree. So that's what it's talking about, though, is in the tree. So in the sequence view. So if I select this, it's lit up in the sequence view. And if I go in and turn that off, then it will not be, okay? So, I mean, like I said, I see the utility there. I personally don't like it. All right, so the next one here, under View, Show Crosshair in Input Mode. What does that mean? Well, input mode is when we are drawing our own nodes in. And the crosshair that it's referring to is if I go into the drawing tool, the crosshair are these lines that go to my cursor. They make it easier to see where your cursor is at any given point, because the cursor in input mode is this little cross. It's not a mouse, because it's like a little cross with a dot in the middle of it, and it's very accurate. But if if you can't see all that well, it's hard to see it, and so these lines make it easier to see. Now, the reason you might want to turn this off is some computers, older computers, ones who don't have a very powerful graphic processor, will give weird errors. Not errors, like weird graphical glitches, like the crosshair kind of like stays and leaves like a shadow behind of it. And if you're experiencing that, you can turn this off in the view settings here. So if you turn that off, then you don't get those lines along with your input cursor. But I actually like them, so I'm going to leave mine turned on. But that's why you can turn it on or off. The next one, Show Size Tooltip. All right, so what is Show Size Tooltip? The Size Tooltip is this. If I select an object, okay, and then I begin resizing it, it shows me, this is called a tooltip, right next to my cursor. You see that where it has the size in metric and in inches? And that is actually really, really handy. So why would you want to turn that off? I don't know. But if you did, that's where you would turn it off. So that is what this is talking about. That's handy. I don't know why you would ever want to turn that off. Show backdrop below grid. So this is simple. The grid is these purple and gray lines. That's my grid, okay? And the backdrop is, if I bring in, so go up here to my backdrop library. The backdrop is just a picture that you can trace. And if I have it set to show the grid, show backdrop below grid, that means that the backdrop is underneath of the grid. If I turn this off, then we see the entire picture, including like its white background, and we don't get our grid lines on top of the backdrop. So I don't know why you would want that. If you've got your grid turned on, then I would want to see that grid so that I can, measure the parts of the backdrop visually. Each one of these gray squares is a 1/4 inch, so like I can see that. This is like roughly, this area here is like roughly a 1/2 inch wide, right? Just by looking at it. And if I don't want my grid, like I don't want my grid on top of here, then I probably don't want my grid at all. And you can just toggle that on and off with this button here. So if I don't know why you would want to have this on top of the grid, but if you do, that's how you do it. So let's see. Lock the properties, sequence view, and library windows. All right. This is something that everybody should go, if you're just like watching this video and you don't have your software open, you're just watching it, go open your software and put a check mark next to this. Everybody should have this. All right. And the reason is because if you don't, then it's possible to accidentally close your properties menu and then you don't have it anymore. So if I go back and I turn that off, just to show you what it's toggling here, I have an X where I can close my properties menu and my sequence view, and now they're gone. And I can't tell you how many people come in for a lesson on Floriani and they have closed their properties menu and they can't figure out how to do anything because their properties menu is gone. Now, I have it drilled in to the people that come to my classes that the way that you get them back is you go to toolbars, workspace, reset workspace, they come back. Okay. But if you just want to not have them ever go away, under the tool here, or the preferences, view, put a check mark next to lock property, sequence view, and library windows, and those X's go away. You cannot delete your sequence view now. So, yeah, worth definitely. I don't know why that's not the default. That is just mind blowing to me that it's not. But anyway, hide activation codes. This is not for normal people. That is for if you're like me, you're showing stuff on the internet and you want to teach people how to use the software, but you want to, for instance, show them how to register the software. Well, if I showed you my registration code, then you could go and install the software and use up one of my activations. So that's why it lets you hide this. You could also have that checked if, I don't know, you're digitizing with someone dishonest and you think they might steal your activation code. I don't know. I don't know why a normal person would ever want to check this, but that's what it's for, and that's why it's by default it's not checked. Draw selection size. Draw selection size. You know what? Actually, I'm not 100% sure. I'm not 100% sure what that means. Draw selection size. Okay. So I have an idea for what I think it might be. So I think it might be this, where it's showing me the size here in the height and the width. Let's find out. So I've got something selected. We go in here, turn that off. Yeah, that's what it is. So again, not sure why you would want to turn that off, but it's in here, and that's what it's talking about. Draw selection size is this here. All right. So next is show notes in sequence view. So if we have a note, let's see. So this object is here. Add note. Bucket. I don't know. It looks like a bucket to me. So that's the note right there. Okay, so that is, so if this was going to be, I'm just like drawing shapes. I'm like, yeah, this goes to the bucket. This is a way that I can put in a note so that I know, oh yeah, that artwork, that's going to be a bucket, right? That is, you can turn the viewing of those on and off right here? Well, apparently not, because look, you still see it, even though I turned off show notes and sequence view. Okay, well, not real sure about that one. I guess just leave it. I don't know. So yeah. Okay, whatever. Anyway, maybe in here. No, there's no way to put a note there. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what that one is. But the next one I do know, use icons on property tab. So long ago in the before time, they had, instead of these pictures in my properties menu up here, they had words so that I know what each one of these tabs is without having to try to interpret arcane symbols. So if I uncheck icons here, it will tell me in words what these tabs are. Now the reason that they started using icons instead is because when you've got something selected that has a lot of potential properties to it, you couldn't actually see all the properties and you had to tab over. See how I've got these little arrows that I can switch between here? I have gotten used to the icons, but it can really help if you don't know what those buttons mean. It can really help to have it tell you in words what they are, and this is how you do it. So you know, oh, this is pull-push compensation. Okay. Oh, this is where my underlay tab is, as opposed to, by default, my underlay is this picture, right? How is that underlay? But whatever. So that's how you go in and change that. The reason that they do it is just because you can see more of them with them as icons. Although, you know, if I'm being honest, I prefer it to be the words. And then the last thing in the View tab is the theme. So the theme, the silver theme is the default. It just looks like a normal Windows program. But if you want it to look weird, you can go in and change it to be these different options. So I can say Obsidian Black, and we're going to have this like darker, higher contrast version, right? Maybe we want to have... Oop, wrong button. We want to have our theme be this this aqua, because we want to be, you know, kind of like aqua. This is purple. This is not aqua. Why are they calling this aqua? Whatever. So you can change those. You don't get to make your own, unfortunately. I wish that you could. Like, it would be more fun if you could like be like, okay, I want this to be that color, and so on. But it doesn't let you do that. I'm going to leave it on silver because I don't want it to look weird. So that's the View tab. That's everything in View. Now the next tab here is Digitizing. Now this we have kind of some weird stuff in here. So outline input mode, by default we have set to line, and what that means is when I go in and I start drawing something using the artwork tool, by default the tool is going to be left click, and then I left click somewhere else and I create a line, and then I left click somewhere else and I create a line, and that's making straight lines every time I left click. Okay, now if I don't for some reason want to draw with lines by default, I can go into Digitizing and change this to be, for instance, pen. And now when I use this artwork tool, it lets me just draw like a pen. Now I find it to be very challenging to draw like that with a mouse. Maybe if you're using a pen like on a tablet, but I vastly prefer using the straight line tool with a mouse. And if I wanted to do that, I can actually, I keep hitting the wrong thing, I can actually change it. So, and then I'll just show you what the third one is, Bezier. Bezier curves are this type of input here, where you left click and then you left click again, and then you can make a curve between those 2 points. That is what we are doing though when we use the default line tool. I'm going to go back to line here. That is what we are doing in an easier way when we use the shape tool and grab our line and pull it. So I vastly prefer to create curves that way nowadays. You used to have to make perfect curves with the Bezier tool, but now, you know, in the past, like, I don't know, 5-6 years, we've been able to do it this way, which is much better, I think. So I don't see any good reason unless you're just used to using one of those other input modes, to change this from line, especially because if I want to draw with a pen, I can simply change that right here. Okay, so my artwork tool, and then I can change the input right here to pen, to Bezier, to the quick curve. So if I want to draw with a pen, I still can, right? I just, if I change it the other way, then I'd have to keep changing it to line every time I wanted it to be a line, because it wouldn't be the default. So anyway, that's what's going on there at the top of the digitizing tab here. Now, for complex fill, satin, and run, these three settings only actually affect the direct digitizing tools that are found in this section of the software. So if you digitize by clicking and dragging, or by drawing lines, then converting them using the buttons down here, then it's these settings are not going to affect you. But what they do is they change the behavior of these tools. So if I have it on the default setting for this, which is paradoxically actually advanced for complex fill, so advanced and standard, but its default is not the standard, is advanced. So they should call it standard and basic, in my opinion. But anyway, in complex fill mode advanced, which is the way that it works by default, when you go in and choose a complex fill, which is just what we refer to as a fill stitch normally, well, let's say I'm going to draw this little hoof here, right? So I'm not going to do the curves because I'm in line input mode. So there, 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 and then I'm going to close my shape with Shift C. It's going to ask me for an inclination. So the stitch direction, though, by default is 0 degrees. So that's just going a straight horizontal line, but I can move it if I want. I can right click. Now it's asking me where the start point is going to be. Bloop. I've clicked there. Now I click again where I want the stop point to be. So I want it there. Then it generates the area of fill. Okay, so it's asking me for my stitch direction. It asks me for my start point, my stop point, and then here I can go in and pull my curves out if I want to. And I'm not going to sit here and digitize this and make it look nice. But anyway, so that's the way that it works if you have that set on advanced. The difference if I change this to standard, if I go and set that to standard, default angle, by the way, that's that default angle that the inclination comes in at. So if I have this set to standard, then what happens if I do the same thing? I'm just going to go and start kind of like tracing the basic outline of this. Shift C to close. It just, boom, it defaults and puts in the start point, the stop point, the inclination, all at the defaults, rather than asking you what to do. So the whole point, I feel like, of that tool is, rather than using the button down here that's gonna end up doing this same thing, is that with the complex fill tool under advanced, I have more control over, because I don't have to go back into the shape tool to set my start point, my stop point, my inclination. It asks me for that every time. So that is basically the difference between having it set to be standard and advanced. And if you don't use those tools generally, then it doesn't matter what you set these to. But I feel like the default is the right answer for these. And these basically all do the same thing. So if I'm in satin mode and advanced, it's going to ask me for my start points and my stop points. And then run mode, if you have run mode in standard, the reason that they just have that in standard is because for run mode, you usually don't need to set a start and stop point, because for a run stitch, the start point is by default your first click, and your stop point is by default your last click. So there's no reason for it to ask me where my start and stop points are, because it will put the first point will be the start point and the last point will be the stop point. Now, if for some reason I want it to ask me, then I could go in and change the run mode to advanced, and it will ask me for my start and my stop points. But there is no reason to do that. Now, next one down kind of makes me mad. Kind of makes me mad a lot. So manual. Adjust resized manual paths. What does that mean? Right? Like I know what it means, but like your average person looking at that. Okay, so the setting is called manual, and the checkbox next to it is adjust resized manual paths. Well, what that actually means is, you remember when we went and opened a embroidery design and resized it, and it did not resize the design. It didn't add or remove stitches from the design. Well, this makes it so that it will automatically... Oh, this is auto split new satin paths. If I'd unchecked that, I could have got it to yell at me about the satin paths earlier. Anyway, sorry. Adjust resize manual paths. This is what will allow you to open an existing embroidery design. Let's see, what was that? That was a swan. Okay, so we've got the same design as before, but now, because I have a check mark next to automatically recalculate manual paths, right? Adjust resize manual paths. What that means is, remember before when I made it smaller, it was still 6,905 stitches. Now we size it down a little bit. It's going to take it longer because now it has to do math, but now we've only got 5,476 stitches, okay? Now, does this break your design? Sure, sometimes it does. I have a whole video about why you should never resize your embroidery designs, but you know, it's a tongue-in-cheek video, but you know, the point is that when you are resizing a stitch file, you know, chances are something is not going to be perfect when you do it. But anyway, yeah, so I feel like that should be checked by default. I feel like everybody who loads up an embroidery software is going to expect it to add or remove stitches when you are resizing the design. Okay, I certainly would expect it. The first time I resized a design and it didn't do that in the software when they changed that from being the default years ago, I was shocked, and I thought that was an error, and I actually submitted a ticket and talked to the devs, and they're like, yeah, no, we did that on purpose. And I was like, are you kidding me? Anyway, so that is what that setting is. That's what it means, and I would recommend checking it just so that when you want to resize the design a little bit, it goes in and recalculates it. So that's that. Now, next one down, auto split new satin paths. I forgot about this setting. So this is what was making it automatically split when I was trying to force it to make a satin stitch that was too wide. There's no reason to uncheck this for normal people. You know, maybe if you're trying to do some kind of fringe specialty type design. But yeah, auto split new satin paths, I would leave that checked. That will ensure that you don't end up creating satin stitch segments that are too wide to sew out. Auto lock stitches. Yeah, so it will automatically put a lock stitch command at the beginning and end of any stitch, as long as they're not further apart than 5 millimeters minimum lock. No, if they're closer together than 5 millimeters. So that keeps you from having a bunch of tie-ins real close together. But just leave that at the default. This is fine the way that it is for most things. So I mean, it will always automatically lock stitches, but if you set it to do it too close together, you can end up creating an embroidery design that accidentally creates a bunch of tie-ins in one spot, which then gets the thread caught in the needle plate and makes a big mess. So the default setting for this is fine. And okay, so grid, this is where you can control your grid, and you can get to this specific tab of the preferences menu right from your rulers up here. So if I right click on my ruler and go to grid settings, that actually takes me to this tab without having any of the other options there. So this is where I usually go to adjust that, but if you want to do it from preferences, you can. So the horizontal spacing right now is set to every 1/4 inch. Okay, we're in inches right now, so it's showing me this in inches. The horizontal and the vertical are both 0.25, and grid major is set to 4 for both of those. I think by default it's set to 2 when you open the software, so that you end up getting, or no, 8, so you get 2-inch squares. But I like to set these to 4 so that I have 1-inch squares and 1/4 inch grid. That's the way that I like it, but you can set it to whatever you like. And for the colors, you'll notice that the colors by default for these, you've got a light gray and a purple. If you want to have your background of your design space to be a light gray because you have a lot of white elements, so I actually, a lot of times, this button down here, background color, I'll set this to be gray, but that makes it so you can't see that grid if it's at the default color. So you actually have to go in here and change that to be something like black so that you can actually see it if you're going to use a gray background, which I actually use in my personal like digitizing. I usually use a gray background so that I can more easily see white elements in my designs. But that is a setting in the grid here. Now we can also have it show the grid as a solid line. I find this to be distracting though. When everything is a solid line, I don't like that. That just looks foreign to me and I dislike it. We also can set our grid to be dots instead of solid lines, which I really don't like that either. But you know, those are personal preferences. You can have them set however you like. I'm going to have mine set as dashed lines, and I'm going to put this back on gray. And so I just made it a darker gray so that when I switch it to be a gray background for myself, I can actually see it more easily. All right, so back to grid. We also have the option to do snap to grid, snap to guidelines, snap to anchors, and snap to move. Okay, so these are ways that if we have our grid, we can set our grid to be much finer than this, and we can actually do snap to, which means that when I go to draw, it will only draw at one of these points on the grid. So if I want to make a perfect shape, I can draw it like this and it will stay within that grid. So I can set my grid size to be much smaller and then get a finer level of control for this. But if I wanted to create my own, you know, motif stitches or things like that that need to be symmetrical, perfectly symmetrical, snapping to grid is a way to do that. Like if I wanted to have a finer control over it though, I might go in, set this to metric, go into my grid settings, and change this to be the spacing for every single millimeter, and then here maybe every 10 millimeters for the grid major. That's going to be way finer and allow me to create much smaller and more intricate snap to grid designs, because each of these is only 1 millimeter. You see what I'm saying? So this is how, you know, like if you look at some of those designs that they make in palette to put on a Solaris, you know, the ones that you can buy, they're using something like this to draw those intricate patterns in to make it so that it's perfectly symmetrical. Anyway, so that is snap to grid. Now we also have snap to guidelines, which we can access these kind of as like a quick setting in the right clicking on the ruler. And what that does, the guidelines will cause it to snap to these lines that we can bring down. Watch this. If I left click and drag, I can bring down my own lines that aren't part of the grid. Now, this is kind of a situational usefulness, I feel like, but if I want to snap to these, I can. So now it's going to automatically snap to these lines that I've generated, okay, by pulling them down. That's what that means though. So right in here, snap to guidelines, that is what that's talking about. Yeah, so that is situationally useful. We can turn the grid off and just have guidelines. So I just turned off my grid and now I've only got guidelines. So, you know, yeah, I don't know, maybe that could be useful if I was, you know, making, I don't know, would it be more, I guess if the distances you need are not uniform, you could do this. I don't know. I'm just telling you what the buttons do. All right, now snap to anchors. What is that? I'm not sure what snap to anchors is. Let me figure it out real quick. Snap to anchors. Does it mean by anchors points? So let me turn off snap to grid and anything else. All right, so I've got these nodes here. Is it now going to, if I draw, yeah, it wants to snap to existing nodes. Okay, so that makes it so that it's snapping my individual clicks to existing nodes. So now I've got this shape that I just created using the nodes in this like quasi-pentagon that I drew. That's actually interesting. Yeah. I can't think specifically of like a ton of useful stuff that I could do with that, but I see that it's neat. Okay, well that's what that means. So that's what that snap to anchors means. I didn't know that. I had to figure that one out. So that's sweet. All right, so that is, I think that's everything in our grid settings, right? Yeah, that's every option in the grid settings. I'm gonna go ahead and set my grid back to, you know, the default way that I had it. Let's see, spacing. Well, I want this to be in freedom units, and I want to have this set every 4, and this set. Wait, no, the opposite. This needs to be every 0.25. Sorry, and this needs to be every 4. This is the way that I normally have mine. Oh, and I got to show the grid, this button here. There we go. Got my grid back. And then I want to clear, I'm just going to create a new file to get rid of all those lines that I made. Okay, so what's the next tab here? Blah, 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 grid, auto-based. This is just a way that we can set the properties of our basting stitch if we want to create an automatic baste. Now, if you've never done an auto baste, if you've never basted an embroidery design, the purpose is that sometimes you want to float a design, you want to float a fabric on the stabilizer and not have the stabilizer hooped, or you've just got fabric that wants to shift against your stabilizer, and what the basting stitch will do is put a really long stitch length run stitch all around your design that's easy to remove, but that keeps the fabric from shifting when you're embroidering it. And so these are settings for that. So if I've got an embroidery design here, I'm going to be real creative here and just use the default in my texture, and I want to baste this. Maybe I'm going to sew this on something that's shifty, and I want to make sure that it doesn't move in, you know, have the fabric move against the stabilizer. That is this button here, auto baste, and the settings for this are located in here in auto baste. So you can have it do crosshairs on the baste. Let me put this in 3D so we can see it a little better. So the crosshair is, you see how this comes down, this comes down, this comes in, this comes in? That crosshair is kind of showing, is giving you like a north, south, east, and west. Now, in this particular design, I don't think that I really need that. So I could go in and undo this, and just to show you what it looks like if I don't have it do that, uncheck that, hit this, then we don't get those crosshairs. See, they were kind of overlapping inside of my some of my stitching there, and that would make it harder to remove the basting stitch. But we can go in and change the stitch length itself. So the longer the stitch length, oh, I just basted around my baste. The longer the stitch length in here, the easier it is to remove the stitches, but also the less secure it is. And then baste past outer edge of the design, so I can adjust this, and the higher this value is, the further from the stitches the basting stitch is going to be. So if I go in and do it now, it's much further away. It's less effective the further from the design it is. Okay, but you know, you may need it to be further away for whatever reason, and that is, again, that's how you go in and adjust that. All right, so that's the whole lower row, which is by default, it starts on format. So we've done this whole row here. We got 3 more tabs. So I'm going to go up to the next tab here, color sort. There's only one option in color sort, the maximum allowable color overlap per layer, and this is a percentage. What this is doing is when it does a color sort, it uses this value to determine what is and is not able to be split into 2 areas of the same color. So for instance, if I've got a design that's got a black background and then a red foreground, and then on top of that red foreground another black background, it can't go and combine the 2 black areas because there's a red between them. And this this level of overlap that you put in on this can dramatically change that, and it can make color sorting break your design. Do not change this setting. Leave it at 5. Fonts. So this is an interesting thing that we can do. We can actually disable fonts in my font list that I will never use. Okay, the only problem with that is it doesn't show you a preview of what these fonts look like in this part of the software. So you have to actually go in and look at the fonts. So let me go ahead and get rid of this. Get out of here. You too. Go on, Basting Stitch. Get out. So if I go in and I look at my fonts here, and the reason that you might want to do this is just because there's so many fonts. There's like a million of them. So if there's ones that I'm never, ever in a million years going to ever use, then I could get rid of them from this list and make it easier to look through my fonts for the ones that I do want to use. So if I go in and I'm like, okay, let's find one that I will just never use. I'm never going to use the Braille letters, say. Okay? Or, well, maybe I will. I'm never going to use, find one that's stupid. Circled. I'll never use this. Why would I ever use that? So I can actually go in, go to Preferences, go to Fonts, and circled. Put that in disabled. Okay, now that's not going to be in my list of fonts anymore. And so you can go through and find any of them that you think are too stupid to ever use and get rid of them. Then you don't ever have to look at them ever again. So that is something that you can do there. Now you also can favorite fonts, but I don't know where it shows up that they are favorited when you do that. So like, there's no way to go under here and tell me to only show my favorite fonts. So I'm not sure where that is, where you find your favorite fonts. I don't know. I haven't really looked that hard, but if you go in here to favorites, you can favorite some. Again, I don't know where you go to find the ones that you favorited though, so I don't know. And then the last one in here is file association. So we can actually associate different Stitch files on our computer with this software. So if I go in here and I say, okay, every PES file, I want to put a check mark next to that. Every PES file I want to be associated with Floriani, so that in, oh, this isn't where I meant to be, in C drive, embroidery, if I double click any of these PES files, what it will do is actually open it in Floriani, okay, by default. And so if you want to have it be able to do that for more than one file type, or whatever file type you want, you can go in under file associations and put a check mark next to any of these different file types, and it will associate that file type with this software for you. So that's a cool and handy thing to be able to do. So anyway, that is the last of the preferences menu. So I hope you learned something about the options in the preference menu today. I mean, I know there's a lot of stuff in there. I feel like there wasn't a ton of detailed documentation on what exactly all this stuff does all in one place. So that is the preferences menu, and thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.